What is going on, Lucid fans? Welcome back to Financial Journey. So today I want to give you a good overview of the current data points, what they're truly saying, and over and above that, I just want to briefly talk on the Q1 earnings and go over the good, the bad, and the ugly and my take on them. So I'm going to go over all that. Make sure you guys hit that thumbs up and subscribe. I always greatly appreciate that. And with that, let's get right to it. So currently it is down 0.62%. There was a lot of optimism today, so it did have a high of 746, tried to attempt to break into the higher percentile of the Bollinger Band, and that was largely because of some very bullish CPI data. But it is bouncing off of that very heavy resistance and pulling back, and especially as well with stochastic, with it being 54, it was kind of neutral, if not a little bit overbought, potentially. So this is why it's pulling back a little bit. But despite that though, number of retail investors are getting in. So very much liking, for instance, the earnings, the Q1 earnings. Especially yesterday though, it did have a low of $6.85. And I'm very happy to say I caught the bottom. Only bought 250 shares though, but still I'm very happy on catching that. But despite that though, I want to give you guys a good overview of some of the data points and so forth. But starting off with the earnings. One positive thing that I really do like is that they hired a new VP of marketing. Even though I was a very big fan, for instance, of the previous VP, which was Jeff Curry, technically they needed this position to be filled. And 𝗪𝗓𝗧𝗪, if I'm saying that right, he definitely does bring a lot of good experience. So hopefully that will be able to help Lucid behind the scenes. Although, based on the Q1 earnings, Peter did say for the most part they are heavily relying, for instance, on test drives and still word of mouth as their primary source of marketing. I definitely think that needs to change, and hopefully 𝗪𝗓𝗧𝗪 does change that. Although based on how Lucid has said it in the past, it doesn't appear as though marketing has that big of a budget. So it will be very interesting to see what they do, like I said. But when it comes down to, for instance, their earnings, they were a double miss. So they kind of lost on both the earnings per share and revenue. So earnings per share was a little bit lower than expected. So negative 43 cents compared to negative 41 cents, and revenue was very, very low of 149.43 million versus the analyst estimates, of course, 209.88 million. And as far as cash, they did have 4.1 billion in liquidity, and that should be good up until Q2 of 2024. But throughout the call, they did and very much reiterated that they have sufficient amount of cash, mostly through the PIF, through green bonds and so forth. So as far as liquidity going forward, they have more than enough. But just my own interpretation, I do feel that near the end of Q3, this is where you will see a little bit more of a tentative dilution, but that would be through the S3. And on the actual earnings day, this is where they did amend the previous S3, which was from, I think it was August of 2022. So they adjusted it to around the 7.4 billion in common stock. But because they subtracted, I guess, what the PIF initially bought of 915 million in December 15th, I believe, 2022. So they subtracted it. I don't know if that's a normal procedure, but regardless, they did provide a amended S3. But some takeaways as far as the retail questions. There was only 2 questions that they answered, one of which was a kind of a common sense one, that they would answer yes, that they are going through the proper due diligence and the proper channels to see if it's feasible. And that question was for this. So would you consider launching the Gravity with more price accessible trims to first attract more buyers considering the current economic conditions? So they answered that one fairly acceptable. But this one I'm kind of surprised that they didn't even bring up. So about that 50,000 mid-sized SUV that was planned for 2025, so mid-decade. So the fact that they did not answer that kind of makes me feel that that is getting pushed back, especially what I'm going to be talking on when it comes down to the Gravity, which is a little bit more of a negative. This one, I was kind of laughing when they physically read this word for word, and that's kind of a little bit more of a slap in the face. And when it came down to Peter's question, and unfortunately more on a broader scope on the earnings, Peter once again was and showed his failed inability to answer a true question without either stuttering or just kind of referring back to technology. So definitely they need to hire a MC or someone that can actually answer questions. Sherry does a fairly good job. Sometimes she's a little bit more hit and miss, but generally she saves Peter quite a lot. So Sherry is one of those hidden kind of assets for Lucid. But based on his answer, because the question was right here that he's previously previously stated that he likes to underpromise and overdeliver, but yet obviously no stats justify that. So he talks on a lot of different things, technology and so forth. He doesn't necessarily answer the question, just he's saying that he hopes that things will be changing. And his last statement right here kind of puts in perspective that it is just truly hope that he's relying on. So I temper with this unerring optimism for the future for Lucid. So I don't know what unerring means, or maybe that's just him stuttering. But once again, it's not necessarily the best question. So Lucid definitely does need to say that, but I think this is kind of whatever at this stage. I've been saying this since Q1 of 2022 that they definitely need to answer the actual questions, but here we are, whatever. It is what it is. I think this is one of those earnings that maybe I kind of just realized and expected that Peter was just going to divert and bounce off of a lot of questions, just revert back to, for instance, the technology front. But there was this post that was done on Twitter, and it does put it in a pretty good perspective on, for the most part, what the Q1 earnings did encumber. So Q1 in Saudi, so as far as them starting production, they're going to be starting that in around September. So what they're going to be doing for the vehicles in North America from the AMP1 facility, they're going to actually deassemble it, send it to Saudi Arabia for them to reassemble it. So that way it's actually built in Saudi Arabia. Kind of backwards, might result in a little bit more of a additional cost, so earnings per share might go down a little bit. Peter did say numerous times the fact that he is very much laser focused as of right now to ensure Lucid does succeed. He did say roughly about 4 times the fact that customers have told him that it is a $200,000, or at least the heirs should be a $200,000 vehicle, but yet they are sold for $87,000. So I don't know if that was just his way of marketing per se to show that Lucid is a deal at these prices, or at the $87,000 price target. So that one kind of didn't really sit well with me. The fact that he kept trying to push it seemed a little bit more marketing-ish. And he did say, I guess the week prior, he did actually go on a test drive, for instance, in the Gravity. And when it comes down to the Gravity, this is where it kind of was not necessarily the best. So the Gravity, I think a lot of people were assuming that it was going to come out in, at least start the reservations fairly soon, but they did say that it's going to be later in the year. So most likely Q3 potentially, or early Q4. I'm not necessarily sure when the reservations will be coming out. I was under the impression it was going to be spring, as what they have previously indicated, but it does seem like things are behind the gun a little bit. And as well, some little bit more of a negative when it comes down to the Gravity. An analyst actually tied Peter down and asked him, so what is the deal, for instance, with the Gravity? When can we expect, for instance, it to be launched or production to start? And Peter kind of hipped and hawed, didn't really necessarily answer. Luckily enough, I think it was the analyst from Bank of America that did actually provide a follow-up question, just saying, can we expect it at least within, for instance, 1 year from now? And unfortunately, Lucid said no. So it is fair to assume that most likely production will start in either late Q3 or potentially Q4 of 2024, which means Q1 2025 for deliveries. And this is probably why they didn't answer this question, because I don't see it very fitting the fact that Gravity being and starting deliveries Q1 2025, why they would have a mid-size SUV to kind of take away from the whole momentum of the Gravity, because the Gravity is a very big pivotal part of Lucid. So the fact that they did, or I guess unofficially pushed it back a little bit more, didn't really sit well with me. My own interpretation, of course, but I could be wrong about that. They didn't technically say no, they didn't technically say yes, just their inability to really give us a definitive date on that was not necessarily the best. But like I said, there was a lot of things that was said from the actual Q1 earnings that was positive. And the fact that they are being a little bit more conscious about revenue and expenses, because they did say that for the most part, they are really focusing on a lot of the expenses going forward. A little bit late to the game, because Rivian did have their earnings, and clearly their earnings per share significantly grew on a, for instance, a quarter by quarter basis, largely because because they did a lot of layoffs in 2022. And not only that though, in Q4 2022, Rivian did look at a lot of their expenses. So Lucid, unfortunately, behind the scenes is just a little bit slow. And there was a comment that was posted, I couldn't really necessarily find it straight away, but someone put it in a good perspective on how Lucid versus Rivian's earnings went. Lucid, they come off as, for instance, a lot of very intelligent individuals that love to work on this kind of vehicle and can make a very, very beautiful vehicle. But as far as business mentality, they lack that significantly. Versus Rivian, they are very much business conscious. So they know how to, for instance, tentatively forecast cutting on expenses, whereas Lucid didn't. So once again, this is just my own interpretation of that. There was a lot of things that was said during the Lucid earnings that I'm going to touch on in later videos, especially considering I did live stream that as well, and I kind of went over some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But again, this is what my take is, and of course I could be very much wrong. Let me know you guys' thoughts on this. Do you think the Q1 earnings was positive, negative? What was your take on that? But I did do a quick poll on Twitter just to get people's perspective on the earnings. Only 310 votes, so not pretty significant, but majority of which people thought that their Q1 earnings were horrible. I think horrible is a little bit far-fetched. I think it would be more so just the just okay factor, because there was some positive things that they did indicate that they're at least being aware of, and they did signal that there is a lot of partnerships potentially coming. I don't know, they didn't really elaborate on that as far as what they mean, whether it be with Samsung potentially, or if they're just referring to, for instance, Panasonic, or if there might be something else. So that might be something for them to really answer going forward. But that aside, like I said, let me know you guys' thoughts. As far as some additional data points for today going forward, there is a grand total of $1.64 million worth of puts versus $459,000 in calls. So based on the options activity, a lot of people are assuming that Lucid is going to continue to trend down. And based on some of the FIB levels right now, so with it being $7.25, it is currently between this S1 and the pivot. So $6.96, as I said, leading into the earnings, that is a very big point that you really need to watch for, that if it does break below that, then anticipate to be trading between $6.43 and $6.96. So once again, let me know you guys' thoughts on that. I'll give you guys one final overview and data point, and that is shorts. So short score is currently 93, which has been going up and up. Utilization is 100%. And as far as what shorts are doing today, they're increasing 824.56 thousand shares. 23.91% of the free floats being shorted. 153.61 million shares overall is being shorted. So that is very high. And for instance, cost to borrow is a little bit flat, but 32.65%. And just to put it in perspective, just to show you how big of a dollar value shorts are and kind of what a big pain they are, there's a grand total of $1.11 billion worth of shorts out there. So that's pretty significant. But like I said, with CPI data that did come out, that doesn't really give, for instance, Powell any justification to raise their rates. If anything, and it does continue to trend down, then most likely either in the tail end of Q3, this is where the Feds might potentially cut rates. My own interpretation, of course. I'm not a financial advisor. You guys do your own due diligence at the end of the day. But when it comes down to it, let me know you guys' thoughts overall on Lucid. And if you have been buying, selling, holding, like I mentioned, I did buy in yesterday at $6.85. But I'm definitely going to be watching very, very closely on exactly what Lucid is doing behind the scenes, and more specifically, what he is doing for marketing, because I do feel that there's a lot of aspects of Lucid that do need to improve. And I've oddly been getting a lot of comments asking if the PIF is potentially going to take Lucid private. I touched on this when I was live streaming. I personally do not feel that they are ever going to take Lucid private, even though it does make logical sense, but it's a little bit more of a beneficial aspect for Lucid to stay as an American company, because there is a lot of good benefits as a result of that. So it might be advantageous for the PIF and Saudi Arabia to stay as a secondary or as a controlling interest, for instance, in Lucid, and versus taking it over. That might not necessarily be the best. But once again, I could be very much wrong. Let me know you guys' thoughts overall on Lucid in the comments below. If you haven't already, hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Always greatly appreciate that. One final thing, don't forget to take advantage of this free promo, link in the description below and also the comments, and that is with Moomoo. It is only for May. Sign up for a free account, you get one free stock. Each stock is valued up to $2,000. So a complete no-brainer in my opinion. So take advantage of this while you can. Link in the description below and also the comments. Without further ado, appreciate you guys watching. Let's all make a lot of money on Lucid.